Stop making a fool out of me. Why'd you come on over, Valerie? Valerie. Valerie.
All right, let's get started. Another great song picked by your wonderful, amazing, extremely talented global history teacher, Mr. Doyle. All right, so Spain in the New World. We kind of got a little bit into this last week as well, with the Ed puzzle, as well as with the documents that we did, talking about Hernan Cortez and his encounter with Montezuma. All right, so early on, right, Spain in the New World, the Spanish brought guns and cannons, which were far superior to the bows and arrows that the natives had. European metal was better protection. They wore, when I say that, they mean that they wore like coverings for themselves. They wore like shields and armor, where the natives, they did not wear armor. Spanish brought horses, which were native. Which the natives have never seen before. Remember, horses are more native in Europe, where camels in Africa, and then if the llamas are going to be native in the New World. So that's kind of what the natives were using here. Spanish also bring disease, right? That's one thing that will wipe out many of our native people, is because they have no actual immunity to these diseases, right? It says natives have no immunity to a European disease. Immunity means that you have the ability to withstand certain diseases, right? You're probably a little bit more familiar with the word immunity now. We're talking about what's going on in the world today with the pandemic. Population in the Caribbean will decline about 90% because of disease, not any specific disease. And smallpox and measles and things like that, they have no immunity to it, and it runs through the natives fairly quickly. So Hernan Cortez. If you remember, we talked about, or I told you that we talked about Cortez today. We did the documents on Cortez, and you guys got to read, what type of a ruthless person he was, and how really he took advantage of the Aztecs. So a little background on Cortez. He's a landowner in Cuba. Okay, he's originally from Spain. He becomes a landowner in Cuba, which is a Spanish royalty at this time, viceroy. He's a Spanish conquistador, and he wants to conquer the Aztecs. Remember, the Aztecs are along the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Okay, and in 1519, he set sail from Cuba with about 600 men and 16 horses. Okay, but the horses compared to, the no horses by the natives, it's a great large difference. Okay, he will make his way to Tenochtitlan, and he is guided by someone by the name of Malinche. Here is Malinche. Here I have some worksheets. I'm not sure if we're going to do them. We don't really have a ton of time. 2 weeks left. Woo! But Malinche, she is kind of convinced by Cortez to lead him to the center of Tenochtitlan, and he kind of doesn't really reveal as to his complete plans to what he's going to do with Tenochtitlan. So Malinche does actually lead him. She speaks native tongue, but also speaks Spanish as well, so she can communicate with both. And Hernan Cortez, on top of that, will use a very smart idea, and he will team up with many of the enemies of the Aztec people. Okay, so because he teams up with the enemies right now, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, like I said, enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's why Cortez teams up with them. All right, so moving on, Montezuma. He is warned about Cortez early on, right? Obviously, Tenochtitlan is a little bit more inland of Mexico, right? When when Cortez meets up with Malinche, when he lands on Mexico, word gets back to Montezuma. So he has already been told about Cortez, and he is coming from this faraway land. At this point, Montezuma actually thinks that he could be Quetzalcoatl, right? So what does he do? In case this is God, I'm going to bring him a bunch of gifts. And because he's nervous and doesn't really know what will happen, why does my God want to make his way to our kingdom? He begs Tim not to come to Tenochtitlan. And the Spanish made it to Tenochtitlan, and they are impressed by the city. And again, you read this in the documents, you saw it with the video that we watched last chapter, right, about how impressive Tenochtitlan really was, right? Very large, in the middle of a lake, almost gleaming with gold. All right, so there is the beautiful road to Tenochtitlan, right? And as you can see, there it is. Flames and Spanish are making their way. All right, so early on, Cortez is welcomed to Tenochtitlan by Montezuma after he finds out and realizes that Cortez is not going to stop making his way to the capital. Okay, the Spanish try to convert the Aztec to Christianity, and that results in tension, right? And to me, when I think of this, a lot of times it's almost, they use it as an excuse, right? They know that these people are not going to, believe in Christianity, so we'll use that as our excuse as to why we're going to attack them. And really, they're probably going to attack them anyway. They're just going to use the fact that these heathens don't believe in Christianity and they must be killed or converted. They will eventually imprison Montezuma, and other conquistadors will then come to Mexico. Fighting will start amongst the groups, and Cortez and his men will destroy Tenochtitlan, and they'll end up building Mexico City. So for those of you who kind of asked me, why is Tenochtitlan not around? It's because it's where Mexico City is today, right? The Lake Texcoco had dried up, and now they have a city there. Okay, so next person that we are going to talk about is Francisco Pizarro. I believe I also have some document work for Pizarro. I know I have something for Atahualpa as well, but we'll get to that later this week. So sorry, I had to pause for a sec. Pizarro, from Peru, he wants the wealth of the Incan Empire, and he begins his travels in 1532. Inca King Atahualpa becomes the king after there's an Incan civil war, right? Remember we talked last time about how the Incas were not originally united. At this point, under Atahualpa, they are united, right? After the civil war, after the tensions had subsided, Atahualpa is their king. Okay, Pizarro makes his way. He is over here in the New World now and goes to the Incan capital and tries to convert Christianity, convert the Incans to Christianity. Atahualpa will refuse, and this will then ensue a fighting, and very similar to what happens in the Aztecs, right, will be what happens with the Incas. Pizarro will take control of the Incan Empire and eventually dies because of other Spanish conquistadors, right? And they're very selfish in this way. They don't really, when the conquistadors make their way to the New World, they don't look at it as like, hey, we're fighting for Spain now. It's now that we're going to establish this for Spain, and I am going to gain fame, right? They become very selfish in their motives. So that's how Pizarro actually dies, ironically. Okay, effects of the conquistadors. Millions of people are conquered or killed, absolutely, right? Depending on, they're either murdered or they're killed through disease. Europeans will take gold and silver, right? Most of the gold and silver that was here is funneled out of the New World and brought back to Europe. The entire world, though, is now connected by sea routes, right? Thanks to Magellan, from circumnavigating, which means to travel around the world. Some of you guys missed that. And new horses, weapons, and diseases are brought to the New World. Awesome. We got new horses and weapons and diseases. Great. Natives do begin to lose faith in their own religion And you're wondering why. Well, because their religion had forsaken them, right? When they needed their gods the most against the Spanish, their gods were not there to help them, right? They were murdered, and they were treated very, very poorly. Spain becomes the most powerful nation in Europe, right? And this will be, again, off the heels of them kind of falling below, France, falling below England, because of the expulsion of the Muslims and the Jewish people, right? That is why the Spain wants to regain their prestige. Okay, the Spanish will continue to dominate the Americas. So Spain will own from the California down to South America, right? So all along the Baja, right, here's the globe. All right. So along this area, all the way down to Mexico, Central America, and then pretty much most of, if not all of South America. Remember, parts of Brazil will be for Portugal, but the rest will be for Spain. Okay, they will break them into 4 provinces, or essentially 4 countries, right? And those will be ruled by a council of the Indies and viceroys. Basically, they're going to have, a small group or a small council group kind of rule, as well as they're going to have, governors take control as well, right? That's really who a viceroy is a governor. Okay? They wanted to continue to convert the natives to Christianity, and some missionaries will use force to convert them, right? Many of the missionaries will use force. Many of the native Europeans will use force. And the Spanish then start to bring their European ways to the New World as well with farming, right? They develop what we call our encomiendas. And encomiendas are large plantations or large farms that are owned by one or a couple people, and they have many workers, right? Many people are working. Usually encomiendas are, forcing slaves, kind of like the latifundia in Roman times, right? And then when we get to next year, right, talking about like plantations, this is the same thing, right? Encomiendas, they're basically forcing people to work and grow these crops, right? Natives were worked to death. Okay, change in the slave trade. One man speaks out against the slave trade early on. That's Bartolome de las Casas. And he speaks out. He wants to stop the exploitation of Native Americans. Says that they cannot, they should not be subject to this unfair treatment. But don't think that De Las Casas is a great guy, because what does he want us to do? Instead, he urges the conquistadors to go to Africa and take them as slaves. So Bartolome de las Casas is kind of the reason for the African slave trade, or one of the why it increased so much. Las Casas believed Africans had immunity to disease and were skilled farmers. Right, he used the excuse that the natives were dying, especially from their diseases. African slave trade will then begin in the 1530s, and at least he realizes it, but though he realizes it too late, De Las Casas eventually will regret his decision, because he obviously, look what happens. Now the Africans are now subject to this these brutal treatment and forced into slavery. And then hundreds of years of slavery will then continue after that. So, kind of an awful move by Bartolome de las Casas. He wanted to help the natives, but instead of just helping the natives, he ends up hurting. All right, before I sign off, a couple things. I'm gonna have a couple of Google Meets this week, so we can get some FaceTime. We won't test this week. Please put an effort into these ed puzzles. A lot of you guys have been putting bad answers or skipping answers. If you continue to do this, I am not going to give you credit for this, right? These are all get added up. Each ed puzzle will be a 2-point value. As you can kind of tell, that's how the grade's been going. All right. Hopefully there's some change in our nation, because it's very, very upsetting what's going on. I'm very sad for many of the African Americans and how they feel that they don't have a voice. So I hope we can change, and I hope we can grow and become better from this. All right, kids, stay safe.